For most of us, the biggest penalty for making too much noise might be a scolding shush from the movie theatre seat behind you. But in A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead, you're only ever one creaky floorboard away from getting snuffed out by an alien threat that's always listening out for you, like it's the most sinister form of Siri. This instant fail stealth-heavy horror story does a pretty convincing job of recreating the breath-holding tension of the films, in addition to borrowing heavily from the likes of Alien Isolation, in the way it casts you as the reluctant rodent trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The result is a consistently stressful undertaking from start to finish, even though my careful creep down the road ahead moved at a relentlessly glacial pace and occasionally snagged on some slightly curious design decisions. A standalone story mostly set around 4 months after the alien invasion scene in A Quiet Place Day 1, The Road Ahead casts us as college student Alex Taylor and follows her attempts to flee her abandoned hospital hideout in order to make a silent and steady pilgrimage towards an offshore safe haven isolated from the threat of the monsters. It's an exceedingly straightforward setup, but tender early moments spent with her likeable boyfriend Martin and kind-hearted father Kenneth were enough to get me invested in Alex's cause before inevitable alien-inflicted tragedy spurs her escape plan into action. It's a bit of a letdown that, in spite of its strong start, the payoff for the Road Ahead's plot in its dying hours is all too predictable. And its overall story comes up noticeably lacking in impact, particularly in the wake of the far more emotionally resonant tale found in Day 1 earlier this year. Still, there's no shortage of affecting human artifacts to comb through along the way. In lieu of any interactions with other survivors, I got a strong sense of the history of each space I shuffle-stepped through by observing the heartbreaking family portraits handcrafted in a child's crayon tacked to the wall of a deserted safe house, or the hilarious note about a toilet paper-related riot left by a store owner in a seaside shopping strip. There are plenty of great world-building touches like this in The Road Ahead, and I had ample opportunity to study every little detail, since I moved through it in a constant state of slow motion, desperately trying to keep my every movement on mute. It might be a first-person adventure almost completely devoid of combat, but The Road Ahead is no walking simulator. It's a balking simulator. Every step you take or action you perform is a reluctant one, because even the lightest door hinge squeak or stomped on gravel crunch can alert an alien hunter to your whereabouts and end your slow walk to safety in an instant. Thus, most of my progress through Alex's adventure was made with micro movements to my controller's thumbstick, tiptoeing through rooms at a snail's pace and incrementally tilting forward to push doors open, or carefully pulling back to slowly open desk drawers to search through. Almost every environment you explore in The Road Ahead is purpose-built to test your coordination and fine motor skills. Rooms are cramped and cluttered with beast-stirring booby traps to avoid, and, if you're not careful, simply brushing past hollow barrels or pulling open the cover of an air vent too eagerly can bring your swift undoing. Thankfully, Alex is given a homemade phonometer early on, which, when carried in her left hand, indicates the decibel level produced by her movements relative to the overall volume of the ambient sounds around her. I basically spent the entire 7-hour journey anxiously trying to prevent its meter from lighting up as a result of each steady-handed interaction I performed. Not unlike trying to extract the wishbone in a game of Operation without suddenly triggering the patient's buzzer and blinking red nose. Some of the ways The Road Ahead conjures up a life-ending crunch or clang do feel a little contrived though. It makes total sense for there to be shards of broken glass lining the paths beside the shattered windows of an upturned train carriage, but the number of discarded paint cans to be found on remote forest hiking trails does seem a touch too improbable. Like rolling out from under the Simpsons family car and finding yourself in a car park that's inexplicably full of garden rakes to step on. I managed to suspend my disbelief and just abide by the noise-making obstacle course that the developers have created, but I do wish they'd been able to disguise their monster-rousing trip-ups a little more organically. The threats to blowing Alex's cover aren't only found in the world around her though, they're also within. Alex is an asthmatic, so actions of overexertion, like pulling herself up onto ledges or carrying heavy planks to use as makeshift bridges, as well as moments of heightened stress such as finding herself in close proximity to one of the alien stalkers, can push her into a state of noisy hyperventilation, which acts as a heavy breathing beacon to any monsters in the area. This brings the welcome challenge of identifying when to best use the inhalers that can be collected along the way, even if it does seem a little silly that they're single use only, as though their previous owners huffed each of them right up to the limit. The road ahead isn't only about stalking around in silence like some sort of survival horror street mine, and along with the phenomena you are provided with some other basic tools to keep the keen-eared killers at bay. Bricks and bottles can be picked up and lobbed to temporarily distract them in fairly standard stealth game style, while some other items serve dual purposes, like the hand flares that can be sparked to either light up darker environments or tossed away to confuse your petal-faced pursuers with their crackling hiss. It does feel a bit arbitrary the way certain items in Alex's inventory can only be wielded in certain hands though. It may create an added layer of tension to be forced to choose between measuring sound with the phenomena and illuminating the path forward with Alex's flashlight, for example, since they can each only be wielded in her left hand. But it hardly makes any logical sense. Where was this flashlight purchased? At Ned Flanders' Leftorium?
Oh, right as rain. Or as we say around here, left as rain.
Occasionally I'd find myself caught in close quarters with a monster and not have any noise-making tools in either hand, which put me in the lose-lose situation of either trying to make a run for it and getting instantly slashed in the back, or standing perfectly still only for the blind beast to accidentally bump straight into my nose and strike me down on the spot. No! Thankfully, the road ahead's generous autosave system meant I was rarely penalised too heavily each time I perished, so although the slightly more predictable nature of its enemy encounters mean it's never as outright terrifying as Alien Isolation, it is at the very least more lenient and less likely to frustrate because you couldn't reach a manual save point. The quarter-speed crawl along the road ahead does eventually run out of steam though, even despite the fact that encounters with the aliens do evolve in some ways. There's only ever one enemy type, but midway through they develop the ability to sense your movements even if the sounds you make are masked by the threshold of the ambient noise, effectively forcing you to simply take your hands off the controls and stand as still as a statue until the concussive effects of their scanning is completed. Modest changes like this help preserve the tension level throughout, but they struggle to completely disguise the fact that you're otherwise mostly doing tedious tasks like turning valves and searching through drawers for supplies like any other survival horror game, only at a considerably slower pace and without any combat sequences to release that tension in. There is one short flashback sequence that allows you to briefly blaze away with a shotgun out of the back of a speeding van, but the road ahead could have done with a few more of these dynamic detours to help break up the bit-by-bit crawl even more.
Look out, look out! Jesus!
A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead does a commendable job of taking the uniquely silent scary movie series and spinning it into an interactive adventure, even if its methods for sustaining stress seem a bit too clearly contrived at times. I greatly appreciated the many handcrafted human touches that made its evacuated spaces so evocative, and the safety net of its consistent autosave meant that my numerous instant deaths never became a source of frustration. However, although it may maintain a regularly tense atmosphere every shuffled step of the way, the absence of any significant story surprises or enough substantial changes to its simplistic stealth-based gameplay means that A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead doesn't quite have enough twists and turns to make for an unmissable journey. For more horror stories, check out our reviews of Silent Hill 2 and Until Dawn, and for everything else, stick with IGN.